This story is about two boys, Pat and Prawn, who have been enemies since childhood because of a long-standing rivalry between their families. Even in college, their departments continue the rivalry, forcing them to hide their growing feelings. But as they get closer, they realize that their love might be the one thing their families can't control. At the beginning of the drama, we see a fight breaking out between some college students. Two groups had formed, one from the architecture department and the other from the engineering department. The engineering students grab a boy named Y from the architecture department, and Pat, one of the leads, is also there. Pat tells Y that he has 2 minutes to call his friends. The scene then shifts to Prawn, the other lead, who is also from the architecture department. One of his friends comes and tells him that some guys are about to beat up Y. Prawn calmly puts his things back and goes to help his friends. Soon, a fight breaks out between the two groups, and then Prawn and Pat come face to face and are shocked to see each other. Before they can start fighting, a teacher arrives, so everyone runs away. We then see Prawn and Pat's past. They were neighbors, but their families had been longtime business rivals. Their parents fought so much that Prawn and Pat were raised to see each other as enemies. They were always trying to prove that they were better than each other, and since their bedroom windows faced each other, their rivalry continued at home, too. However, Prawn had been away for 3 years to study somewhere else, and now he had returned home and ended up at the same college as Pat. In the present, Prawn asks his friend why the fight started. Y explains that the previous day they had been watching a match where the two groups supported different teams. They were joking around, but when the engineering team won, they started celebrating loudly. Y then showed them the middle finger, and that's when the fight began. Meanwhile, Pat's friends decide to catch Y alone, beat him up, and record the whole thing. We then see Prawn and Pat's families. Prawn's family is very strict about his studies and career, while Pat's family is much more relaxed. When both of them tell their families that they are attending the same college, their families warn them to stay away from each other, but never let the other side win. That night, Pat and Prawn have a funny argument over where the trash can should be placed, just like their fathers used to argue. In the end, Pat loses, and Prawn tells him to move the trash can before going home, which irritates Pat. At home, Pat's sister Pa tells him that no matter what happens, he must never hurt Prawn. She doesn't explain why, but it seems something happened in the past that made her care deeply about Prawn. The next day at college, Pat's group starts planning to beat up Y again. Meanwhile, Y notices a poster for a music competition and encourages Prawn to participate. Prawn listens to him and goes to get the form. Y then heads to the studio alone, and Pat's friends start following him. Pat, however, follows Prawn instead. While keeping an eye on Prawn, a teacher asks Pat to get a form too. The teacher then goes outside to get the forms, leaving Prawn and Pat alone, and they end up having another little competition. Pat plays the drums while Prawn plays the guitar. The teacher returns, stops them, and gives them forms, telling them to make copies themselves. Pat watches Prawn from a distance, but suddenly Prawn leaves. Later, we find out that Pat's friends mistook Prawn for Y and started beating him up, so Pat rushes over to stop them because he had promised his sister that he would never hurt Prawn. Prawn manages to escape from them, and Pat arrives just in time to hide him. We also learn that Prawn and Pat weren't always enemies as children. Once, Prawn saved Pa from drowning, which is probably why Pa has always been so protective of him. That night, Pat secretly goes to Prawn's room so they can talk about the situation between their groups. They both realize that they don't actually want to fight each other, so they come up with a plan to stop their friends from fighting. However, their plan fails when the two groups start fighting again, and to make sure Prawn doesn't get hurt, Pat pretends to fight him. They both end up with a few injuries. Then the fire alarm goes off accidentally, and a teacher arrives. Everyone runs away, but the teacher catches Pat and Prawn and warns them that if this happens again, they will be banned from participating in college activities. The two become worried. Later that night, Pat and Prawn meet outside a pharmacy and treat their injuries while discussing how they can stop their friends from fighting. They decide to exchange IDs and try to keep both groups away from each other. Even then, they turn it into another competition over who will add the other first. Pat sends the request first, making Prawn smile. Later, Prawn notices a watch in his hostel room that had fallen off when he saved Pa as a child. Pat then comes to his room and returns the watch, telling him not to tell anyone that they're talking because people might think they have become buddies. Prawn fixes the watch and puts it on. Meanwhile, we discover that Pat has been living in the room directly opposite Prawn's, although neither of them knows it yet. The next morning, we see Pran and Pat going through their morning routines. Pran wakes up early and calmly gets ready, while Pat keeps turning off his alarm and finally gets up at the last minute, rushing to get ready. Neither of them knows yet that they are living right across from each other again. At college, Pran and Pat are now staying in contact to stop the engineering and architecture students from fighting, and they try their best to keep their groups away from each other. But despite all their efforts, one day both groups end up at the same bus stop where they are about to start fighting. Luckily, Pat and Pran manage to handle the situation together because there's a camera nearby. That night, a food delivery driver accidentally gives Pran some extra food and leaves. Pran assumes it must be free, so he eats it. But then he gets a call saying that the order for the room across from him was delivered to his room and asking him to give it to them. Pran then leaves some drinks with a sorry note outside the opposite room. When Pat sees the note and notices the beautiful handwriting, he assumes that a girl living across from him likes him. He tells his sister Pa about it, and Pa says that he will probably try to flirt with the girl. Pat confidently says that he would never do something like that. But the next day, he leaves some momos and a thank you note outside the opposite room. Pran finds this very strange, while both of their friends start teasing them, saying that someone must have a crush on them. Pat's friends tell him that he should take things further, so Pat leaves another note with a gift and asks his mysterious neighbor to meet him on the rooftop. Pran's friends tell him that he should go. That night, when Pran goes to the rooftop with the note, he gets annoyed when he sees Pat there. Pat still waits for the girl and even asks another girl if she lives in room 431. Pran finally realizes the misunderstanding and walks up to Pat, telling him that the person he has been waiting for is actually him. They both realize that they have become neighbors again and feel awkward, but soon start laughing at how ridiculous their assumptions were. Pat then gives the gift he brought to the other girl, who later tells her boyfriend on the phone that Pat is a very strange guy. Later that night, Pat and his friends go out for drinks, where Y is working as a waiter. When they get him alone, they start bothering him and record a video of him. The next day, Y and the others are hanging out in Pran's room when Pat and his friends also come over to Pat's room. Pran messages Pat telling him that his friends are already inside, but it is too late. Pat's friends start knocking on Pran's door because they want to know who the mysterious girl is. Pat tells them that there is actually a guy inside, making everyone awkward. He then takes his friends to a restaurant. That night, Pat and Pran try to sort everything out, but suddenly, Pat's father arrives. Pran quickly hides under the bed because if Pat's father saw them together, it would create a huge scene. Pat's father starts talking about their family's old rivalry and says that Pran has always followed Pat and tried to compete with him. Hearing this hurt Pran. After Pat's father leaves, Pat apologizes to Pran, but Pran says not to worry and tells him that he will change rooms. The next day, Pat goes to his old school to meet his sister and tells her everything. Pa says that he feels guilty about what happened in the past. On his way back, Pat remembers something from their childhood. One Christmas, he and Pran had performed music together, but Pran's parents saw them together, and afterward, they sent Pran away to a boarding school for 3 years. Everyone believed that the whole situation had happened because of Pat. So, wanting to get rid of that guilt, Pat tries to stop Pran from moving out. He tells Pran that this time, he will be the one to move. Then the two jokingly start tickling each other on the bed, but suddenly the property agent arrives and misunderstands what she sees. She tells them that the room has already been booked. Pat starts laughing and tells Pran that this time, he won't have any problems because of him. But on the other side, another fight breaks out between the engineering and architecture groups. This time, they even destroyed the seating area at the bus stop, which means a much bigger problem is about to come their way. Before that, we see a morning scene where Pran is trying to write a song, but he has no idea how to start. Y suggests that he should take inspiration from his real life and think about a secret crush. Hearing this, Pran remembers an old memory. Once, Pran had forgotten to bring a guitar pick, so Pot made one for him out of his ID card so Pran wouldn't hurt his fingers while playing. Thinking about this memory, Pran starts smiling, which Y notices. Y says that when we think about our crush, we can't hide our smile, but Pran insists that it's nothing like that. Later that night, Prawn goes to a food stall for dinner and finds Pot there. Since there are no other seats available, they sit together. Pot starts teasing Prawn as usual, but later he pays for his food and tells him that dinner is on him. Prawn tells him to leave after eating, but Pot still waits for him. They then return to the hostel together. When they find out that the elevator is broken, they start racing up the stairs to see who can reach their room first. They run around playfully until they reach their rooms completely out of breath. Prawn uses his inhaler, and Pot jokingly asks him for it too. They start play fighting again, then smile and head into their respective rooms. But their happiness doesn't last long. Pot's friend arrives and tells him that their group fought with the architecture students again, and this time they damaged the bus stop. The next day, Prawn is also called to the director's office because of his friends. The teacher tells them that since the fight was started by their side, they will have to pay to repair the bus stop. They don't have enough money, which puts Prawn in a bad mood. Then Prawn learns from his friends that the other group had posted the video of Y online. Because of this, Prawn gets angry and starts ignoring Pot's calls. Later, he goes to Pot's construction shop to buy some supplies. Pa is there alone, so she gives Prawn a discount. Meanwhile, both Prawn and Pot are at their family homes. After Pa gets angry at Pot, he tries to talk to Prawn using an old tin can telephone. Pot asks why Prawn is mad at him, saying that the fight was started by Prawn's friends. Prawn tells him that Pot's group posted Y's video and that Pot looked very happy in it. Prawn is still angry and refuses to talk to him properly. Pot deletes the video to make things better, but Prawn isn't happy. Then Pot keeps trying to make it up to Prawn and help him. He tells Prawn about a business company that provides funding for eco-friendly projects. The next day, Prawn goes there for an interview, and Pot shows up too. Because the elevator is crowded, they have to stand very close to each other, and Pot starts teasing Prawn as usual. Pot also stays during the meeting. Even after Prawn gives a great presentation, the investors aren't ready to provide the funding. Pot tries to handle the situation, and when he suggests making the project more eco-friendly, the investors finally accept the idea. Later, Pot tells Prawn that he's his good luck charm, and Prawn even compliments him a little. Pot then asks Prawn to go to a music store with him. When Pot sees one of his friends there, he hides with Prawn, and once again they end up standing very close to each other. Later that night, Pot comes to the bus stop again to help Prawn, who is working on his design. Prawn is completely confused, so Pot starts thinking like an engineer and helps him. They even pretend to be a couple while considering different weather conditions and emotional situations, and this finally helps Prawn come up with a perfect design. However, the next day, the investors tell them that they can provide only half the amount they need. This becomes another major problem for the architecture group. Pot feels bad about the situation, so he decides to involve his own group to help them and save the architecture students from spending too much money. At first, one of his friends refuses to help, but Pot explains that the bus stop was originally built together by seniors from both the architecture and engineering departments. If only the architecture students rebuild it now, it could become their property. Hearing this, Pot's friends finally agree to help. Prawn's stress is reduced, and that night he thanks Pot. But Pot has another surprise waiting for him. He gives Prawn his old guitar back, which he had secretly kept safe all this time. Prawn becomes extremely happy, and Pot also tells him that they can participate in the competition again. A flashback reveals that Pot was the one who convinced the director to let them participate, but he doesn't tell Prawn. Instead, he jokes that he likes seeing Prawn's face when he loses, which is why he returned the guitar. Prawn doesn't take his words seriously and happily returns to his room. But their problems weren't over yet because the architecture and engineering students weren't ready to work together, and they started arguing over every little thing. So in front of everyone, Pat and Prawn continued pretending to be enemies. To stop the fighting, Prawn announced that they wouldn't work together anymore. Later, he and Pat discussed the situation privately and realized that if things continued like this, the work would never be completed. Prawn then came up with an idea. Since both groups loved competing with each other, they would turn the whole project into a competition. After finishing their work, the architecture group would leave a message challenging the engineering group to do the next task, and then the engineering group would do the same. By doing this, they eventually completed the entire bus stop, and Pat and Prawn were very happy that their plan had worked. After the bus stop was completed, there was supposed to be an interview involving both departments, and the engineering students showed up dressed especially well for it, which made Prawn laugh. But when their photographer arrived, they discovered that she was Ink, Pat and Prawn's old school friend. Before Ink could say anything after seeing them, Pat quickly took her aside and explained that if their groups found out that they had all been school friends, it could cause problems. So Pat asked Ink to keep their past secret. Ink agreed, but in return, she asked Pat for a favor. Later that evening, during rugby practice, Pat's friend Corn asked him if he already knew the photographer. Pat simply said that she looked cute, so he was flirting with her. Their coach overheard them talking and told them to run laps. After practice, Pat sees Prawn searching for his earbuds in the dark and tries to help him, but accidentally steps on Prawn's earbuds. Later that night, Pat goes to Prawn's room and gives him his own earbuds. Prawn initially refuses to take them, but Pat tells him that he doesn't want Prawn to make excuses later and say that he couldn't finish his song because of him, so he is giving him the earbuds. Prawn finally accepts them. Pat then tries to enter Prawn's room, and the two start joking around again. Prawn tells Pat that he should take a shower because he smells like sweat, but Pat jokingly stuffs Prawn's head into his shirt just to annoy him. Prawn gets irritated and pushes him out of the room. Pat then starts pretending that he doesn't have the keys to his own room and asks Prawn to let him sleep in his room, but Prawn ignores him, closes the door, and starts smiling. The next day, Prawn sees Pat sharing a drink with Ink at a shop, and he immediately gets jealous. A flashback reveals that Prawn had also been jealous of Pat and Ink back in school. Once he had brought drinks for himself and Pat, but he found Pat with Ink instead, which ruined his mood. Now, in the present, Prawn quietly walks away after seeing them together. The next day in class, Y notices Prawn's new earbuds and asks when he bought them. Prawn lies and says that he lost his previous ones, so he had to buy new ones. He then messages Pat asking him to come to the bus stop to work on the project, but Pat doesn't show up. Prawn's friends tell him that Pat couldn't come because of family business. However, the truth is that Pat is actually modeling for Ink's clothing photo shoot. Ink is taking pictures of him, and when she fixes his hair, Pat seems to enjoy it. He starts becoming interested in Ink. Pa also comes to watch the photo shoot and asks Ink to teach her some of her photography skills. Ink takes a few pictures of Pa too, and then invites her to dinner, but Pat signals Pa not to come because he wants to spend time with Ink. Pa understands and leaves, saying they can meet later. Meanwhile, when Prawn sees Pat's modeling pictures on Instagram, his jealousy gets even worse. He takes out his frustration during rugby practice and ends up hurting his own shoulder. Later that night, Prawn sees Pat and Ink again and tries to avoid them, but Ink invites him to have dinner with them. Prawn sits with them for a while, and then Ink notices the bracelet Pat is wearing, which Ink had given him back in school. She is happy to see that Pat has kept it all this time. Prawn remembers that Ink had made the bracelet for Pat in school, so he becomes upset and makes an excuse to leave. Later, Pat brings dinner to Prawn's room and notices his shoulder injury from rugby practice. Pat applies medicine to his injury, and Prawn also helps Pat clean the makeup from his face. This time, their teasing feels a little more like flirting. Pat calls Prawn's dimples cute and then directly tells Prawn that he is cute. Both of them become very happy. Finally, their rugby match takes place. Ink also comes to watch and says that she will support both of them. During the match, Pat and Prawn continue teasing each other, but Prawn injures his shoulder again. Pat wants to help him, but he can't show his concern in front of their friends. Later, Ink gives Prawn a bracelet, exactly like the one Ink had given Pat. She explains that she had made one for Prawn too, but he had been transferred before she could give it to him. Prawn thanks her and then asks if she likes Pat. Ink says that she only sees Pat as a good friend, just like she sees Prawn. They laugh and continue talking, but seeing them together makes Pat jealous. That night, Pat brings medicine to Prawn's room and once again claims that he forgot his keys. Prawn thinks he's joking, but when he realizes that Pat is actually sitting outside his room, he lets him in. Neither of them can sleep that night, so they start talking. During the conversation, both of them ask the same question, whether the other likes Ink. Pat suggests that they answer at the same time. Prawn says no, while Pat says yes. Pat is happy after hearing Prawn's answer, but Prawn is hurt by Pat's answer. He becomes very emotional, and then Pat suddenly asks him if he would ever like him. Prawn tries to avoid the question, but after Pat keeps asking, Prawn finally says, "I hate you," and turns away. Pat doesn't realize that Prawn is hurt by Pat's answer. Prawn then quietly turns to the other side and starts crying, and later pulls the blanket away from Pat and goes to sleep. Pat wakes up in the morning and can't figure out whether someone is cooking in the kitchen or if the place is on fire, so he quickly goes to check. Despite the heartbreak from the previous night, Prawn behaves normally, and the two continue arguing and teasing each other just like before. When Prawn leaves for college, he finally lets Pat stay in his dorm after saying no several times. After Prawn leaves, Pat shamelessly starts looking around his room and checking his things. Later, Prawn asks him to use his computer to retrieve a file. While on the computer, Pat sees some old photos of the two of them and feels happy. When Pat goes to Prawn's department at college, Prawn's friends notice him and try to catch him, but Prawn saves Pat just in time and tells him that he needs to be more careful. Pat starts teasing him again, but then Ink sees them. She also gets the impression that there might be something going on between Pat and Prawn, but Prawn quickly leaves saying that there's nothing like that. When he later comes back to get his flash drive, Ink sees them again and starts smiling. Pat and Ink begin talking, and Prawn feels jealous seeing them together, but this time he stays quiet. Later, Ink and Pat have dinner at the same place where Pat and Prawn had eaten together before. While watching the way Ink orders her food, Pat suddenly remembers Prawn. Later, Pat tells his sister that he likes Ink, and Pa agrees to help him. She tells Pat to take Ink on a date so they can test whether Ink has feelings for him. Pat then invites Ink to lunch, and Pa comes along too. Pa gives Pat some signs to look for that would show whether Ink likes him, but Ink doesn't show any of those signs, making it clear that she doesn't have feelings for him. Pat then leaves them and goes to a music store to buy drumsticks, where he runs into Prawn. They argue as usual, but Pat suddenly realizes that all the signs Pa described are actually things he feels towards Prawn. When Prawn starts talking to someone on the phone, Pat becomes jealous and asks if he is dating someone. That's when Pat finally realizes that he likes Prawn. After getting some advice from his friend, Pat goes back to Prawn's room to figure out his feelings, but when he sees Prawn talking to Y, he becomes even more jealous. Prawn has no idea why Pat is acting so strangely. Then, Pat remembers the Christmas party when Pat and Prawn had written a song together and performed it at the party. Pat realizes that the song had actually been about his and Prawn's story, even though he didn't understand it at the time. In the present, Pa assumes that Pat is thinking about Ink and encourages him to keep trying to impress her, but Pat says there is no point anymore. Pa realizes that maybe Pat likes someone else, but Pat denies it. Then, the day of the music competition arrives. The engineering group performs first, followed by Prawn's group. Prawn performs the same song he and Pat wrote for the Christmas party, but Pat becomes jealous when he sees Prawn being so friendly with Y on stage because that song is special to him and Prawn. After the performance, Ink notices that Pat is in a bad mood. As a joke, Pat asks Ink if she likes him, but she says no and tells him that she knows he's upset about something else, and if he wants to talk about it, she is willing to listen. Pat agrees. Later, Prawn's architecture group wins the music competition. Prawn's friends start teasing the engineering students, but Pat takes his group away to prevent another fight. Prawn notices that Pat is still in a bad mood. Later, both teams go out for drinks, and Prawn's friends once again try to tease Pat and his friends. Pat doesn't want to fight, so he takes his friends somewhere else. Then, Pat waits for Prawn on campus. He is also drunk, and when he sees a video of Prawn and Y together, he becomes even more jealous. Soon, Y arrives on a scooter to drop Prawn home because Prawn is drunk. Pat and Y are about to fight, and Pat is about to reveal the truth about their relationship with Prawn, but Prawn stops him and sends Y home. Pat gets angry and asks Prawn why he's reacting this way. Prawn gets angry too and goes back to his room. While taking a shower, Pat keeps thinking about everything, then goes to Prawn's room to talk to him, but Prawn isn't there. Pat then goes to the rooftop and finds Prawn standing alone there. They finally talk. Pat admits that it hurt him to see Prawn performing their song with Y. Prawn is confused and asks why it matters so much when they're not even friends. Pat finally admits that when Prawn left, he was actually happy because he didn't have to compete with Prawn all the time. But without Prawn, he felt incredibly lonely. Pat says he doesn't know what their relationship really is, and both of them become emotional. Then, Prawn asks if Pat wants them to stay friends. Pat says no, and the two finally kiss. After the kiss, Pat has a smile on his face, but Prawn walks away in tears, leaving Pat standing there alone. Prawn lies on his bed, touches his lips, and thinks about the kiss. Just then, Pat starts knocking loudly on his door, but Prawn refuses to let him in. The next day, the bus stop project is finally completed, and both student groups gather there for a group photo. Prawn completely ignores Pat. Later, Pat stops Prawn to talk, but Prawn says there's nothing to talk about. Before Pat can ask anything else, a teacher arrives, so Prawn walks away. Even afterward, Prawn looks very sad. Before going home, he leaves his guitar in Y's room because he's afraid that if his mom finds it, she might have him transferred again. Meanwhile, Pat watches Prawn through his window, but Prawn ignores him. Then, Pat goes to Prawn's house under the excuse of delivering some important papers, but Prawn's mom refuses to let him inside. Pat's dad asks why they have to make their children enemies, but Prawn's mom snaps back at him. Then, Prawn's father comes out and takes the papers, while Prawn watches everything from a distance. The next day, the architecture students leave by bus for a volunteer trip. They think only architecture students are going, but Pat suddenly shows up to join them. Y immediately gets annoyed when he sees him. During the trip, Y gets up to get some water, so Pat quickly takes a seat and tries to talk to Prawn, but Prawn doesn't respond. Just then, Y returns and angrily looks at Pat, so Pat apologizes and goes back to his own seat. Eventually, everyone reaches a beautiful town near the beach, where the students have to take part in different activities. Pat keeps trying to get closer to Prawn, while Prawn continues avoiding him. Y doesn't like Pat getting so involved with their group. During one of the games, Pat and Prawn end up on the same team, and they have to stand close together on a piece of newspaper while maintaining their balance. They both lose their balance and fall to the ground together. Seeing this, Y gets furious and tries to attack Pat, but Prawn stops him. The architecture students are also unhappy with Pat, so Prawn tells them to ignore him. But Pat comes over on his own, sits beside Prawn, and even takes food from Y's plate. To prevent another fight, Prawn finally agrees to talk to Pat. That night, they meet on the beach. Pat wants Prawn to tell him what's going on in his mind, but Prawn simply says that he shouldn't make things more difficult for him, and walks away. Pat still doesn't give up, and joins Prawn on a truck going into the city to pick up some supplies. When they're alone, things become normal between them again. At the local market, Pat keeps teasing Prawn, and Prawn starts behaving normally with him like before. On the way back, their vehicle breaks down, so they both push it. Prawn suddenly slips and falls straight into the mud, ruining his clothes. Pat laughs when he sees him, so Prawn smears mud on Pat too. They then go to a river to wash their faces and clothes and end up playing around in the water together. Later, they lie down and talk calmly. They realize that their lives are actually very similar and that they never were able to become friends because of their parents, even though they never truly hated each other. They both wonder how different their lives might have been if their parents had never fought. The next day, they add color to the trip supervisor's printer, and Pat secretly prints out a photo of Prawn. He shows it to Prawn and starts teasing him. After reaching the camp, the next activity pairs Pat with Y, and they're supposed to spend the night together. Y decides to use this opportunity to plan an attack on Pat with his friends. When Prawn tries to stop them, everyone becomes suspicious of him. Seeing the situation getting serious, Prawn suddenly shouts that he has something to tell everyone. Meanwhile, Pat thinks a fight is about to start and prepares to throw a punch as soon as he opens the bedroom door. But the person standing outside turns out to be the trip supervisor's nephew. At the same time, Prawn lies to his friends and tells them that his first love is now in a relationship. Everyone starts drinking with Prawn, but Prawn doesn't actually drink and cleverly throws the drinks away when no one is looking. Later, Prawn goes to the beach, where Pat grabs his hand. They sit together, and Pat brings up their kiss again. He also tells Prawn that he doesn't like ink. However, neither of them admits that they have feelings for each other. Instead, they make a bet that whoever falls in love first will be the loser. The next day, while waiting for the bus, Pat is eating snacks and starts flirting with Prawn again. In the next scene, Pat sits in his car, takes a selfie and sends it to Prawn, telling him to come sit in the passenger seat so they can go for a drive. Prawn sees the message while having breakfast, and he almost chokes on his food. Instead of replying, he sends Pat a picture of his dad and tells him to talk to him instead. Pat laughs after seeing the message, but then Pa comes and gets into the car. It is Pa's first day of college, so Pat compliments her and jokes that all the guys will be lining up behind her. Meanwhile, at Prawn's house, his parents notice him smiling while texting and ask who he's talking to, telling him to share the details with them. Prawn says it is just a friend, but they don't believe him. Then Prawn's mom tells him that he can date anyone, whether it's a guy or a girl, as long as it isn't one of the kids from next door. Hearing this makes Prawn feel a little hurt. In the next scene, we learn that there is going to be a school play, and the architecture students decide to perform a BL love story to make it something different. Y wants to handle the sound, so he asks Prawn for help. Meanwhile, Pa loses her contact lenses, and when she runs into Ink at college, Ink helps her get to her class and compliments her, saying that she looks beautiful. Later that evening, Pat and Pa are sharing the same hostel room. While talking to their parents on the phone, their dad tells Pat to win at rugby. Pat doesn't want to play rugby anymore, but he can't bring himself to tell his dad. The next day, at college, some seniors ask Pa for her chat ID so they can get her to sign something, but Ink steps in and tells them not to bother the freshmen. She helps Pa and her friends, and Pa thanks her. Meanwhile, in the library, Y needs Prawn's help with the sound setup for the play. Y tells Prawn the story of the play, and it is almost exactly like the story between Prawn and Pat. Because of this, Prawn agrees to help. While looking through some books, he runs into Pat, who is planning to audition for the architecture student's play. Pat then asks Prawn to come to his room to return his soft toy. Later that night, Pat uses Pa's makeup to pretend that he is sick so he can get Prawn to come to his room. Prawn brings him food and drinks, and Pat says that he feels hot, so Prawn uses a cold bottle of juice to cool him down. The two then start tickling each other, and even though they are extremely close, neither of them admits their real feelings. Suddenly, Pa enters the room. Pat immediately starts exercising, while Prawn simply says goodbye and leaves. The next day, auditions for the play begin. The actors need to be able to play the xylophone properly as well as act. They find a decent candidate, but then Pat suddenly shows up for an audition too. Meanwhile, in the corridor, Pa accidentally bumps into Y, and Y immediately develops a crush on Pa. Pa quickly leaves because she is carrying xylophone sticks for Pat. During the audition, Pat does really well, but Prawn says that he probably won't get the role because Pat is from the engineering department. On their way downstairs, they run into Ink, who goes to eat noodles with Pat. Prawn and Y follow them, and both Pat and Prawn start trying to make each other jealous, making the whole situation hilarious. Later that night, Pat goes to Prawn's room to get some face cleanser, but Y suddenly arrives, forcing Pat to hide. Y tells Prawn that he can no longer handle the sound work, and because his scholarship could be at risk, Prawn takes responsibility for the situation. Y also brings Prawn's guitar back, and Pat feels hurt when he realizes that Prawn had given the guitar to Y. After Y leaves, Pat becomes upset. The next day, at college, Prawn is in a bad mood because the lead actor for the play isn't taking the role seriously and is behaving rudely. The situation gets so heated that they almost get into a physical fight. That evening, Prawn meets Pat on the rooftop. Pat immediately starts smiling and talking normally because he already knows why Prawn asked him to meet. Prawn makes a deal with him. He will confess first if Pat agrees to accept the lead role in the play. But Pat doesn't want a simple confession. He wants Prawn to publicly declare his feelings. Irritated, Prawn walks away and says that isn't going to happen. However, the next day, the director angrily scolds Prawn because he still hasn't found the lead actor. Just then, Pat shows up and agrees to take the lead role. A flashback reveals that during his audition, while Pat was delivering his lines, he was actually indirectly confessing his love to Prawn. In the present, Prawn watches him and smiles happily. Later, Prawn asks Pat why he did it. Pat says he would rather lose for Prawn than let Prawn get into trouble. Later, Prawn is feeding Pat the food he made because he wanted to cook something special for someone important. Suddenly, Pa knocks on the door. Neither of them knows who should open it. They keep talking and even kissing while Pa continues knocking on the door. The next day, this time, Prawn wakes up to the smell of something burning. Pat has prepared breakfast for him, and the two have some cute flirting between them. Prawn puts ketchup on his lips and kisses Pat, but then real smoke actually starts filling the room because Pat left the sausages on the grill for too long. Prawn gets scared and then gets angry at Pat. Even while heading to college, their flirting continues. Pat is excited to hold Prawn's hand, but Prawn feels a little awkward at first. After a while, Prawn lets him hold his hand, but as soon as Pa appears in front of them, Prawn immediately lets go. Pa comments on how often Pat has been staying at Prawn's house at night. She starts walking with them, but as soon as Pa gets ahead of them, Pat and Prawn hold hands again. During the play rehearsals, they keep flirting with each other from time to time. The director asks Prawn to create music with Pat, but the two spend more time flirting than actually working. Pat then asks Prawn to go on a date with him, and Prawn gives his answer by playing the xylophone. Meanwhile, Pa is still a huge fan of Ink, but her attempt to help Ink find her camera fails. Later, Y comes to Ink to ask about Pa, but Ink refuses to tell him much. Y then shows Prawn a photo of his mysterious crush. Prawn says that he doesn't think he should pursue her, but he doesn't tell him that Pa is actually Pat's sister. Later, Pat waits for Prawn in his car and even avoids his friends. As soon as Prawn arrives, the two start coming up with excuses for how to avoid their friends. Meanwhile, Ink and Pa have lunch together, and both of them are being very cute and clumsy. On the other side, Pat and Prawn secretly eat together on the rooftop so no one finds out about their relationship. Pat wants to take a photo of them for Instagram, but Prawn gets nervous and accidentally drops Pat's phone. Pat says he was only joking, and Prawn apologizes. However, Pat's mood is still a little off. The next morning, Prawn leaves some cute notes for Pat to cheer him up and make him feel better. Later, during rugby practice, Pat's friends catch him because they have seen the Instagram post showing a door handle. They have no idea that it is Prawn's door, so everyone assumes that Pat is dating a girl from the architecture department. During rehearsal, Prawn gets annoyed after hearing people talk about the Instagram post. Since only Pat and Prawn are there, the director asks Prawn to help Pat with his scene. Pat uses the opportunity to make it up to Prawn, and Prawn eventually smiles again. Meanwhile, Y still wants to talk to Pa. When he sees Pa with Pat, he assumes that the two are dating. To stop Y from doing anything against Pat, Prawn finally tells him that Pa is actually Pat's sister. Y becomes upset and goes drinking with Prawn. Prawn tries to explain how difficult a relationship like that can be, but he is actually talking about the problems he is facing in his own relationship. Meanwhile, at Pat's house, his dad finds out that Pat has been skipping rugby because of the play. Pat gets scolded and calls Prawn, but Prawn is with Y and can't talk properly at that moment. Later, Prawn calls Pat back from his house and asks him to come to the balcony. Prawn tries to cheer Pat up with some cute gestures and even gives him his shirt to sleep in. The next day, while working on the sound for the play, Prawn overhears people gossiping about Pat's Instagram post. He immediately goes downstairs and gets annoyed with Pat, who is also wearing Prawn's shirt. They argue, and Pat angrily takes off the shirt. Then he plays the xylophone without his shirt, expressing all his frustration and feelings through the music. Prawn simply watches him and starts remembering their old moments together. Later, Prawn brings Pat a shirt and some water. They apologize to each other and talk about their relationship. They finally understand each other's feelings, and Pat says that he will stop posting about them on Instagram. Prawn tells him that he doesn't have to do that. He simply wants Pat to be happy and says that they need to stay strong for their relationship. Pat keeps teasing Prawn until he finally gets him to admit that yes, they are boyfriends. The two then start joking around. Prawn becomes a little more affectionate, holds Pat's hand, and tries to hug him. Pat playfully pulls Prawn's head toward him, but suddenly the curtain on the set drops and everyone sees them together. Y and Corn are both completely shocked. The scene goes back a little, and we see that while Pat and Prawn were talking backstage, Y came to the sound room looking for Prawn. There was probably a microphone connected in the back, which allowed Y to hear their conversation. He turned up the volume so everyone could hear what they were saying, and then suddenly dropped the curtain, revealing their relationship in front of everyone. Y was very upset, but then the scene shifted straight to the end of their final performance. After the play, Prawn tried to talk to Y, but Y started ignoring him. Prawn tried to make it up to him, but Y was deeply hurt because his best friend had kept such a big secret from him, so he couldn't forgive Prawn. Meanwhile, Pat's group members also taunted him and wouldn't even let him sit with them. Pat walked away, and Corn followed him and explained that they were only pretending to be upset. He said they had no problem with Pat's personal life and asked him to give everyone some time because things would eventually become normal again. Pat then sat alone on a bench, and Prawn came to meet him. When Prawn told him about Y, Pat thought Y was overreacting, but Prawn felt that Y had every right to be angry because he considered Prawn his friend. In the next scene, it was time for rugby practice, and Pat and Y still weren't willing to cooperate with each other. Prawn was there too, and Pat kept flirting with him, which annoyed Y even more, while Pat's friends teased the two of them. Later, Ink, Pa, Pat, and Prawn had dinner together. Pa and Ink already knew that Pat and Prawn were dating, so they started teasing them. Pat and Prawn also kept joking around with each other, which made Pa and Ink happy. The next day, Prawn tried to make up with Y by giving him some juice, but Y ignored him again. Then Pat came over and cheered Prawn up, and after drinking the juice, the two started acting silly just to make each other laugh. Then the rugby match began. Pat played extremely well, while Y showed absolutely no teamwork, especially with Pat. The two argued, and it was about to turn into a fight, but everyone stepped in and separated them. At halftime, the coach scolded them, and Pat privately told Y that if he could win the game, Pat would leave the field. But after Pat left, the game only got worse, and one of their teammates even got injured, so Pat had to return to the field, and he helped cover the score. Near the end, Y had the ball, and Pat told him to pass it to him. After thinking for a moment, Y finally passed the ball, and Pat scored, helping their team win the match. After the team won, the members of Prawn's group also started treating him normally again, and their friendship was restored. However, Y was still upset. When he overheard members of the other team saying that the referee had been biased, he was about to confront them, but Corn stepped in and separated them. That night, Prawn dried Pat's hair and applied medicine to his shoulder. Pat deliberately pretended that it hurt more than it actually did, but Prawn immediately realized what he was doing. He then massaged Pat's feet with his own feet, which made Pat start playfully teasing him again. Just then, Corn arrived and assumed Pat and Prawn were being romantic, but both of them denied it. Later, Pat and Corn went to a bar to celebrate. Before them, some members of the other team had arrived, and one of them threatened Y with a gun outside the bathroom, which scared Y and made him leave. Inside, they also called Y over to clean up and deliberately started throwing drinks on him. When Pat and his group saw this, Pat threw a drink on the guy instead. Corn stopped the fight at that moment, but those guys later cornered Pat alone and started beating him. Pat's friends arrived and fought back, and when one of the guys pulled out a gun, Pat was accidentally shot while trying to stop him. At the hospital, Pat's friends dramatically told Prawn about the situation, but later it turned out that Pat had only suffered a minor injury. Pat and his friends had just been trying to scare Prawn, so he finally relaxed. But then the police arrived and accused Pat of owning the gun. Prawn became extremely stressed about the situation. He told Y everything and mentioned that there were no CCTV cameras in the parking area. While working that night, Y suddenly remembered that the same guy had threatened him with a gun outside the bathroom, and there was a CCTV camera near the bathroom. Y sent the recording to Prawn, and Prawn took it to the hospital and showed the video to the police, helping Pat avoid going to jail. Later, Y, Prawn, and Pat finally talked over a video call, and Y and Prawn's friendship returned to normal. The two went back to their cute and playful behavior, but when Prawn left to go home, Pat's family was standing at the door. Prawn greets them and quickly leaves. Once inside, Pat's parents ask why Prawn came there. Pa makes up an excuse, but Pat honestly tells them that Prawn helped solve his gun case, otherwise he would have ended up in jail. Hearing this, Pat's dad is shocked. After spending a few days in the hospital, Pat is finally taken home by his family. Prawn is also heading home, so Pat gets out of the car to meet him. Pat's dad also thanks Prawn for helping Pat, which gives Pat some hope that maybe their families will eventually accept them. However, Prawn is still scared. Both of them believe that their parents' feud started because Prawn's father stole an employee from Pat's father, and Pat's father cheated, but they have no idea what the real reason is. A few days later, they return to the hostel. Pat is sleeping on Prawn's bed when Prawn needs a flash drive for some files again. When Pat goes to the architecture department, Y and the other students catch Pat. The senior tells Pat that he can only talk to Prawn after expressing his feelings for him. Without hesitation, Pat openly confesses his love for Prawn in front of everyone. Then Y finally becomes friends with Pat, and everyone introduces him to Corn, leading to some playful moments between them. After becoming friends, Y asks Pat for permission to date his sister Pa. Pat says that whatever Pa wants is what matters, so Y can give it a try. Y becomes happy, but Pat also tells him that Pa has been talking to someone lately and always seems to be smiling, yet Y refuses to give up. The next day, Pat and Prawn go back to the hospital for Pat's checkup, where they run into Chai, the same employee they thought was responsible for their parents' feud. But Chai tells them that that isn't the case. He doesn't know the actual reason either, but he's certain that their parents have been hiding the truth from them and that the conflict isn't simply because of a business rivalry. Chai promises that he won't tell their parents about the two of them. Pat and Prawn then realize that their parents have been hiding something from them. Meanwhile, Ink secretly keeps sending gifts to Pa, making Pa think that Ink might have feelings for her. That night, Pa asks Pat how to figure out whether someone likes you. Pat tells her to follow the same tips Pa once gave him when he thought Ink liked him. The next day, Ink teaches Pa how to use a camera, but Pa feels like Ink isn't giving her any obvious hints. Just then, Y arrives to flirt with Pa and even offers to be her model. Y is giving every possible sign that he likes her, but Ink keeps him away from her, making Y realize that Ink likes her. He finally gives up on trying to impress her. Meanwhile, Pat learns from one of his uncles that Pat's dad and Prawn's mom used to be friends back in high school. Then, Pat goes to Prawn's house and the two start looking for Prawn's mom's high school certificate. They find her beauty contest award and certificate, which reveals that Prawn's mom attended the same high school where Pat and Prawn studied. Wanting to learn more, the two go back to their old school, where their juniors are excited to see them. They also reminisce about their school days. Then they talk to an old teacher who tells them that Prawn's mom and Pat's dad used to participate in school competitions together. She doesn't know why their friendship ended later, but she hints that the reason might have been related to love. That evening, Pa tells Pat that she likes a girl. When Pat finds out that the girl is Ink, the two start teasing each other about liking the same person. The next day, Ink discovers that she's actually her peer mentor, which explains why Ink had always been so kind to her. When Pa talks to Ink, Ink explains that she is a mentor, but she specifically convinced everyone to let her become Pa's mentor. Pa's happy to hear this, and the two finally express their feelings for each other. Meanwhile, Pat and Prawn are returning from the mall with some things when Pat's dad spots them outside. He realizes that Pat and Prawn aren't just friends. Pat's dad gets angry at him and even pushes Prawn. Pat finally loses his temper and openly says in front of everyone that he and Prawn are boyfriends. Pat's parents leave angrily and Pat apologizes to Prawn, but Prawn tells him to go home and starts crying. At home, Pat argues with his dad, demanding to know why he hid the fact that he knew Prawn's mom. His dad is shocked that Pat knows about their past. Meanwhile, Prawn returns home and confronts his mom. She keeps pressuring him to tell her what's going on, so Prawn finally confesses that Pat is his boyfriend. He also confronts her about their lies. Hearing this, her mother angrily slaps him, but regret immediately appears on her face. Prawn then storms out. Her mother later goes to Pat's dad and reveals the truth, that Pat's dad had stolen their scholarship. Pat's dad admits that this is the truth. When Pat learns what really happened, he becomes furious with his father and walks away. Meanwhile, Prawn is alone on the dorm rooftop crying as he tries to call Pat, but before he can, Pat arrives. He immediately hugs Prawn, who breaks down and cries even harder. Pat also starts crying while trying to comfort him. Prawn says that he can't take it anymore. Then Pat tells him, "Then let's leave this place together." The next day, Pat and Prawn get on a bus to get away from their toxic families. They both feel that their parents will never forget their old feud. Prawn says they will have to live with this situation, while Pat wants them to leave everything behind and go somewhere far away together. Prawn is afraid that their parents will eventually separate them, but Pat believes that there will be people who will support them. He tells Prawn to rest on his shoulder, then becomes emotional and starts crying himself. They eventually return to the same zero-waste town they visited during their volunteer trip. Pat tries to convince Prawn to throw away his SIM card, but Prawn immediately realizes what he is trying to do. Still, they both take out their SIM cards so their parents can't contact them. There, they meet Uncle Tong, their trip supervisor. Tong is initially confused about who they are, but after recognizing them, he offers them a room at his house and gives them food. They also learn that Tong's nephew, Junior, is having problems because of his mom. Junior doesn't want to return to Bangkok with her because he wants to stay there. That night, Pot and Prawn lie on the same bed. Pot is happy and relaxed, while Prawn is still worried. The next morning, they go fishing because they have to work for their room and food. They catch a big fish, and they are given one to take home. Both of them happily try to clean the fish at home, but they completely fail, so Junior teaches them how to do it. Later, Pot encourages Prawn to play the guitar, something he had stopped doing for a long time. Finally, Prawn picks up the guitar and starts playing, but the song isn't finished. The next day, Junior's mom comes to town, and Junior runs away. His mom asks Pot and Prawn to help find him. Pot goes after Junior, while Prawn walks along the beach with Junior's mom. From their conversation, Prawn realizes how worried a mother can be about her child, which makes him miss his own mom. That evening, Pot and Prawn go to Yode's bar. Pot bargains with Yode and becomes a waiter for a while so they can get free beers, then drinks with Prawn while crossing their arms together, making Yode laugh at them. Later, Prawn gets inspiration to finish his song, but then he finds Junior's book, where Junior has written that he loves his mom very much, which makes him want to call his own mom. But just then, Pot arrives and tells him that Yode has offered them permanent waiter jobs. Prawn says they can't stay there forever, and Pot gets hurt because it sounds like Prawn is already thinking about leaving, so Pot walks away. Later, Prawn finds Pot at the beach, where Pot is about to throw a bottle onto the beach in anger, but Prawn stops him from littering. He then comforts Pot, and the two decide to stay there for a while. But instead of starting work, they end up drinking together on the beach. The next morning, they talk about the romantic moment they shared. Later, Pot wakes up and sees Prawn outside playing the guitar, which makes him smile. Junior then gets ready to leave with his mom, and the two say goodbye to him. Later, Prawn brings waiter uniforms for both of them, and Pot thanks him for staying because of him. But Pot jokes that this isn't exactly a honeymoon if they have to work. Pot knows they can't stay there forever, so he decides that they should return home. Prawn is also happy to hear this. They spend their last night celebrating at Yode's bar, and this time, Tong joins them. Pot and Prawn ask Tong why he continues working on the Zero Waste project, despite all the difficulties. Tong explains that he can't completely change the world, but his work changes his own mindset and attitude, and no matter what the world does, he refuses to let it change who he is. Later, at everyone's request, Prawn plays the guitar and finally finishes his song, choosing to dedicate it to Pot. As they listen, both of them remember their old memories together. We also see Ink and Pa cuddling together, while Y and Corn's friendship continues to grow. The next day, Pot and Prawn say goodbye to everyone and return home. Standing outside the gate, they both imagine how different their lives would have been if their families had never become enemies. But then they wish each other good luck and walk inside. Then the story jumps 4 years into the future. Pat wakes up and brushes his teeth while missing Prawn, and somewhere else, Prawn is also brushing his teeth alone while thinking about Pat. Prawn is now working abroad while Pat has joined his father's business. Y and Corn have also become business partners. Even while hanging out with them, Pat keeps thinking about Prawn. Pat then tells Y and Corn that he is working with his father, while Pa is going to work on a movie. Everyone starts remembering their old school and college days. Y and Corn talk about their girlfriends and marriage, but Pat stays completely quiet about the topic. Later, Pat goes to his old dorm to help Pa move in. When he sees the old doormat outside Prawn's former room, he takes a picture of it. Inside, Ink is also helping Pa with the move. Ink then tells Pat that there will be a reunion for their old high school class. At the reunion, Pat is very happy to meet his old friends, but then Prawn arrives. He sees Pat, but neither of them talks to the other, making it look like they have broken up. During the reunion, a strange game takes place where old photos of Pat and Prawn from their school days are projected on the screen. Seeing those memories makes both of them emotional. Later, Prawn plays the guitar while Pat plays the drums, and they smile at each other. During the group photo, they also awkwardly stand next to each other while everyone still assumes that they are enemies. Even after the party, they look at each other before leaving, but still don't talk. In the next scene, Pat is talking to someone on the phone in his apartment when the doorbell rings. He opens the door and finds Prawn standing there. It turns out Pat was actually talking to Prawn on the phone, and Pat smiles before pulling him inside. We then learn that the two have been pretending to break up. A flashback reveals that 4 years earlier, after returning from their honeymoon trip, they decided to tell their family and friends that they had broken up. Only Y, Corn, Pa, and Ink knew the truth. Their parents continued fighting, although the rivalry had become a little less intense, while Pat and Prawn secretly continued meeting each other and even visited Uncle Tong and Junior. After graduation, Prawn moved to Singapore for work, which is why Pat had been so emotional before the reunion. He had taken a picture of Prawn's old doormat and secretly sent it to him. Back in the present, Pat and Prawn go to a bar with Y, Corn, Pa, and Ink. Y and Corn aren't a couple, but they jokingly behave like one. They all have dinner together, and Prawn gives Pat a foreign drink as a gift for his father. Later, they all return home. At Pat's house, Pa and Ink are there, and their relationship has already been accepted by Pa's family. Then Pa notices that Prawn has also returned. Pat's parents suddenly become quiet because they know Pat will be coming home soon. When Pat arrives, he meets his parents and gives his dad the gift, but doesn't tell him that it is actually from Prawn. His father initially ignores the gift, but later, when he is alone at the dinner table, he drinks from the bottle. Meanwhile, Prawn returns home and meets his parents. He asks his father about his guitar because he's afraid that his mom might have thrown it away. Without saying anything, his mother places the guitar on his bed. Then Prawn starts playing the song he and Pat wrote together. Hearing it from the neighboring house, Pat returns to Prawn's room through the window. The two sit together and continue playing the song, while their parents, now knowing everything, say nothing and simply pretend that they don't know. Later that night, Pat returns to his balcony and Prawn gives him the old tin can telephone they used to talk through when they were kids. The two start talking through it again, remembering those old days. In the final scene, we see that Pat and Prawn are happily enjoying their life together, and even 4 years later, they are still together without anyone trying to stop them. With their happy moments, the drama comes to an end, showing that despite all the problems and their family's long-standing feud, Pat and Prawn finally found their way to each other and got the love they always wanted.